one for you would be, as I'm asking all paleontologists that we've been chatting with here with Dinosaur Trips, is how do you become a paleontologist? We've learned there's a lot of different journeys to becoming one. So take us on yours.
Yeah, so as you said, there's a bunch of different pathways that any one individual could take to becoming a paleontologist. I think that I've had probably the most straightforward journey that anyone could have. I started, so this goes all the way back to when I was 3 years old, and for context, I'm 22 now and turning 23 at the end of 2023. So I've been into dinosaurs for a very, very long time, and that's a pattern I've noticed with a lot of paleontologists. So I've had a very long time to plan out my educational journey and my educational career and calculate what steps that I want to take that would get me from point A to point B. So I actually started volunteering when I was 17 years old at the Earth Experience Museum of Natural History while I was still a high school student. And I did all sorts of things, a lot of housekeeping, a lot of cleaning cases, a lot of sweeping, a lot of dusting. And I started with my university program about a year and a half later. So I went into college for a bachelor's degree in geology specifically, mostly because I've seen several people take different paths. Geology tends to, in my opinion, have the most overlap as far as an undergraduate degree in something that's not specifically paleontology, because of course there are schools for that as well. But if you're in an area where there isn't a school that has a geology program, or you just can't get to that school for whatever reason, geology is always the way to go. I will always push that. So I started my geology degree, and upon actually starting, our museum director, who is a lecturer at my undergraduate university, offered me a paid position as an employee at the museum, which I took, and that was in September of 2019. And so between then and now, been doing a bunch more around the museum. So I've gotten a lot of hands-on experience with fossil molding and casting, dominantly fossil molding and casting, a lot of prep work in our paleo labs, some collections work, accessioning and cleaning off some stuff in our collections, and of course, going out into the field in Montana every summer. And I have actually just recently concluded my degree. I graduated this previous December, and I'm actually starting on a master's at the University of Memphis, where I'll be focusing on sedimentology and stratigraphy, which is the science of sedimentary rocks, which is where fossils are found, as well as investigating some fossils in Cretaceous deposits in Tennessee. So I've had a very straightforward volunteer, get into the field that way, go into academia, and continue my journey with academia.
I'm going to want to ask about all the stuff you just talked,
Yeah,
all the
there's
behind
a
the
lot
scenes
there.
stuff and what it's like to be on a dig. But you know, from your story here, obviously you were focused from a very young age. What was it that interested you? Well, how did you come to be so, convinced that this was the path for you?
So I think probably my earliest introduction to dinosaurs would probably have been the 1999 BBC series Walking with Dinosaurs. I can't quite remember. It's been a very, very long time, obviously, but that was the first paleo series I remember being very obsessed with. And in fact, I actually have some of my friends from that series on my desk sitting with me to this day. And I just remember thinking that really big lizards were really awesome. And that was kind of the start of my dinosaur craze. And it's never really lost momentum for me. I've always kind of been into with the dinosaurs. I wanted to veer off a couple times, veterinary sciences, conservation biology, animation, but I've always come back to paleontology. There's never really been a doubt in my mind.
And what is it now that you're into the studying of it actually? There's the part that like myself and many of our guests are, there's that interest of it from oh, this is exciting, you can learn about dinosaurs on your own time on the side. I listen to podcasts, read
Mhm.
books, and you catch the fun stuff. But then there's the other side when you're actually in the academia of it all and the studying. What does that still bring that same excitement to you? Still
Oh,
fire you up?
ab yeah, absolutely. Now more than ever,
Yeah.
especially as I've grown up and I've started to step foot into the field. And it was kind of a big shock to me a couple of years ago when I started looking into graduate schools because I just knew that I wanted to be a dinosaur paleontologist. I wanted to work with vertebrates. And so stepping into the field, especially whenever I started my Instagram and became exposed more to the other members in the paleo community, I wasn't aware how many research areas there are in paleontology, and so that kind of freaked me out for a little while. But now I really want to know how they worked, especially from a paleobiology standpoint. Something that I'm really interested now is functional morphology and ontogeny, how these dinosaurs would have grown up from babies to adults and how they would have lived and moved and worked with their environment as well as other dinosaurs and other organisms in their environment. And that's primarily what has kept me so interested the past couple of years. Just how they work, how they lived. What can we see in the rock record and in the fossil record that would lead us to believe these things or lead us to certain conclusions about their living situation?
And what are those things that you're looking for? What are some, I mean, I get the sense from, what you're saying, uh, that you're looking for how they lived their lives, what it was like to exist in those times. But what clues do you look for and where do you look for them to even indicate that?
So this one's a little bit difficult for me to discuss, primarily just because I've mostly been entrenched in geology and geological sciences for the last 5 years. I haven't actually done a whole lot of research myself in paleontology. I'm hoping that'll change very soon, going into graduate school and getting to look at the fossils in the Coon Creek Formation, which are not quite vertebrate. There are some vertebrates down there. It's mostly invertebrates, so I'll still have to wait a little bit before really diving into that research. But what I've seen is a lot of most of what I want to do is ontogeny and growth stages. So I guess looking out in the same formations to try to find those juveniles or any fragmentary juvenile material that we can use, do histological studies on, see how old they were in the ballpark of how old they were, and correlate that with both adult and existing juvenile specimens to allow us to really piece together the puzzle of how these animals would have grown.
Okay. It's a lot of, I find there's, in paleontology in particular, there's a lot of imagination that almost still goes into it in the, compared to
Hmm.
perhaps some other sciences. There's this idea that, and even in speaking with paleo artists, as we kind of got our logo and our posters together for Dinosaur Trips, there's still this spark of imagination within this field of science that really seems to fuel a lot of even some of the best theories and discoveries. Is just trying to kind of imagine this world that these creatures lived in.
Yeah, absolutely. Paleontology is a great mixture of both the arts and the sciences, especially in certain areas of paleontology, like casting, which is what I do mostly at our museum and what I've been doing mostly for the past 5 years. You have to be able to look at You have to be able to look at the rocks or your unpainted cast and visualize what this would have looked like if it were in the ground, because a lot of the times we don't have reference images for that. Or, from a paleontological standpoint, if you're doing research, you have to sit and imagine how would this work. And it does. It takes a great deal of creativity and dedication to the arts and the creative side of thinking just as much as it does to science and the logical side of thinking.
Now, you mentioned even before we started recording, we were talking about you just got back from the museum today and
Yes.
doing casting. So talk a little bit about that if you could. Just, A, how you got into to working for a museum and what that's like.
So my museum story is kind of funny. So like I said, I was a high school student whenever I started volunteering. I was a junior in high school, and earth science actually isn't a required part of the curriculum in Tennessee. I totally think it should be. A little biased, but I totally think it should be. But I was so excited that our high school had an earth science class, so much so that I actually skipped taking chemistry whenever I was supposed to take it my junior year and decided to take earth science, which I could have waited to take, but I just wanted to really get into it. I was so excited to start learning about the earth. So I did. And at the very end of the year, around February, late February, March, Alan Brown, who's our museum director, actually paid a visit to the school. And he came specifically to our earth science class, and he brought a bunch of fossils and talked about the museum and Tennessee's fossils and geologic history. And I specifically remember him asking if anyone in the classroom wanted to become a paleontologist. And I was sitting at the very back of the classroom. Nobody else raised their hand except for me. My hand shot up. I was the only person in the class, and he brought all of the fossils that he had taken with him that day and dropped them all on my desk. so that I could take a look at them. And he went into talking about the museum and about how there were volunteer opportunities. And I went home and immediately started begging my parents to take me to this museum. I went, I was enthralled with everything that they had. And a couple of weeks later, I started volunteering. I found that most museums will have some sort of volunteer program, whether they're really, really big or a small nonprofit, in the case of the Earth Experience. And my very first day volunteering, I believe it was either March 8th or March 18th. I remember this, 2018. And I started my very first day in the casting lab. That's typically where we start our volunteers. It's the easiest place for them to start, and it's the easiest place for them to start where they won't break anything in the kindest way possible. And I've always been an artsy student. Like I said, I veered off for a little bit. I wanted to do animation, so I actually am a 2D cartoon artist as well. I just don't post about my stuff. And whenever I found casting, it was kind of everything clicked into place because I knew that paleo artists exist. I can't draw realism, so that was kind of off the table for me. But finding an intersection between working directly with fossils and also using my artistic creative ability, it really clicked for me. And I have been working almost every single day in the casting lab ever since, making replicas, making molds of fossils so that we can make new replicas, and painting replicas so that they look like the original fossils. So a lot of what I do is gift shop cast work because we do sell fossil casts in our gift shop, but I have also been doing larger cast work for exhibits. Right now I'm working on what we call Bob. It stands for Bunch of Bones. In fact, BK Bones, I know you interviewed Bethany. She, I think, interned at the Montana Dinosaur Center. They are the only people besides our museum to have a Bob cast. So we are the only two people who have one. So I have been making that my mission to make it the best that I possibly can for our museum. And so I do a lot of cast work around the museum.
Yeah, I mean, I think I got a pretty good sense of what cast work is from what you just said there. But for people who don't really know what casting is, could you take it down to the basics of how you go about doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, casts, in a very simple sense, are fossil replicas. They are one-to-one scale, exact copies of the original. They capture all of the detail. Now, a lot of institutions are moving towards 3D scanning and printing, although the technology isn't quite up there with analog methods as far as getting the most accurate prints. Scanning, absolutely. Printing, still maybe got a couple years to go on that. So we use analog methods. We use silicone rubber. And so kind of what it looks like is I construct, I do it very basically. I have my fossil, I'll put it up on a clay pedestal of some non-drying clay. I'll encase that in a cardboard structure, usually just a cardboard box I make from scrap cardboard. And then I'll mix up some silicone rubber and pour it over top of the original fossil. It takes about 12 to 18 hours to dry or to solidify, depending on the type of silicone you use. But then once you remove the fossil from that silicone, what you get is a negative impression that has completely recorded all of the details. If there's any bone marrow, you get that on the cast. Any striations, bite marks, any little dents or dings on the bones, you get that in the pre-production. And so what you're left with is a much more durable and cheaper version of, and cheaper in the sense of monetarily.
Right.
It's going to cost a lot more to buy a real Tyrannosaurus Rex claw
Yeah,
versus
as
a
we've
cast
seen recently.
Tyrannosaurus Rex claw. Oh yeah. And so then from there, I sometimes I'll have some sharper edges just from where the resin leaked off into the rest of the mold. I'll sand those off with a power tool, and then I'll paint it to look like the original.
Oh wow, that sounds really fun, actually. I
It
know
is.
we're gonna be definitely including some casting experiences in upcoming Dinosaur Trips experiences. So our
Yeah.
guests will definitely get opportunities to do that. Now, another thing that our guests are gonna get to do, certainly with this summer's trip, and we'll be including this in many of our trips going forward, is take part in an actual authentic, genuine dinosaur dig. I have not been on one myself, so I'm trying to get a sense for myself and our guest of what to expect. And you've had the chance to do this. Take me through a little bit of what it's like being out there in the field and hunting for fossils.
In Montana in July, it can get very hot. So
Alberta will do the same.
the heat, it can get intense if you're not expecting it. 2 years ago, I think, was the hottest that it's been on any of my field excursions. It reached about 106 degrees Fahrenheit one day on the dig site. Yeah, that we actually didn't get a whole lot of work done that day. It was mostly just sitting around the dig site and having adult beverages of choice. So, which is,
That speaks
it
to what we're
happens.
doing at Dinosaur Trips in a
Oh,
big way.
oh,
So.
absolutely, absolutely. So it can get very hot. The terrain can be rugged. So the sedimentary rocks out there are fairly loose. It's a lot of sandstones, mudstones, claystones. There's a lot of what we call popcorn out there, where there's been some recent rain events and the topsoil kind of almost curdles to look like little popcorn chunks of dirt.
Mhm.
So it can be a little slippery in some places if you don't have your footing, but it's when you get to the dig site or when you're prospecting for fossils, it is the most fun experience you'll ever have. Now, I myself am a fan of sitting and working at a dig site rather than prospecting, and for me, that's a very personal issue, just because this is not something I've talked about before. So first time talking about this. I do have a lazy eye, so I actually have double vision. I see two of everything all the time, which, as you can imagine, does make rock hounding and fossil hunting, especially for little itty bitty microfossils, float, which are tiny little bone chunks, makes it a little bit difficult. So
Okay.
I like to sit and work at the bone bed sites. Now, it's also very time consuming because these sediments are looser. It means whenever fossils have been exposed to the surface, they tend to weather and break apart and powderize easier than things that might be preserved in harder sediments, such as invertebrate fossils and limestone, which is what we have a lot of in Tennessee. So things can start to powderize, and it takes a lot of patience to work at a dig site. My very first year, I was working on a Triceratops rib, and I think it took me about 8 hours to uncover 7 inches of bone along the rib. But it was already kind of in the process of, the middle of it was turning to powder. I tried to pick up a little bone chunk, it just turned to dust in my hands. So a lot
How
of
are you
gluing.
uncovering that?
I'm sorry?
How are you uncovering that when you're going about that for 7 hours like that?
Very, very slowly. So half of the rib was already exposed, so a lot of the work was already done for me by the time I got out there. So paleontologists don't have any set of special tools that we use.
Hmm.
It's a lot of things like paintbrushes that you would find at Home Depot or Lowe's or any other hardware stores. We use screwdrivers, flathead and pointed head alike. It makes it easier to get to some of the fossils underneath the rocks that they're in. I like to use pocket knives. They're great. But a lot of our tools are very unconventional. You wouldn't think that they're the type of tools you would find in a paleontologist's field pack, but pretty much pretty much anyone could go to a hardware store or to a craft store, get clay molding tools or sculpting tools, dental picks. We use a lot of those both in the field and in our prep labs, but just anything that could gently get the sediment away from the bone is stuff that we use. It's like I said, it's pretty loose out there, so we don't typically have a need for the bigger tools like rock hammers or, goodness forbid, jackhammers or anything like that that some other people in different outcrops and different time periods might have to use. So a lot of patience with some pretty unconventional tools.
Do you have a favorite find?
I do. So I don't know if I have it with me. It's kind of lost in my stuff right now. But one year when we were working out at this site, now before I go into this, since we do work on a private ranch, the ranch owner does get final say on what we do get to keep and what stays on our ranch. And so a lot of the big sites that we work on aren't things that are necessarily going to be coming to our museum or to any museum. They have mineral rights out there, and so if they want to sell those bones to people, they can. And so we have a really good deal going where we work on some of their sites and we get to prospect and collect and take things home with us, so that's really awesome. So there's a rule with this site that anything on this mound, because we've kind of weathered down a butte and now it looks more like a plateau, and that's where this site is. So anything that's on the butte that could be associated with this site, we weren't allowed to collect and keep for ourselves. But I actually found at the base of the site and a couple feet away, so I was allowed to keep it, I found a juvenile Triceratops toe bone. And anyone who knows me knows that Triceratops, it's hard to see it, but Triceratops is my favorite dinosaur. It's been my favorite dinosaur since I was 3 years old.
Amazing.
So that was probably the best thing I could have ever found. And it's not a whole toe bone, it's about half of a toe bone, but it's a juvenile Triceratops toe bone, and I'm happy. So I will never forget that. It's probably going to be my favorite for a long time.
That's great. All right. One more thing that I wanted to talk about with you was, I mean, the way I came to know about you and your work was through social media. How did take me on how that came about, how you started kind of sharing your parent paleontological journey, stuff about the museum and what that's been like.
Yeah, so I actually didn't start Katie Digs Dinos with the idea in mind that this would be a place to showcase my career or the things that I was doing or the things that I was finding. It's pretty funny. I was actually on a different one of my social media pages and I had joined a paleo artist live stream. I can't remember who the paleo artist was, but I noticed in the comments that someone was a paleontologist and they were talking with the paleo artist about how accurate their art was and they were talking about different paleontological discoveries and I can't it's been a couple years now. I can't exactly remember who it was, but I saw that and I was thinking to myself, wait a minute, there are paleontologists on Instagram. If there's one person here who has a dedicated account to paleontology, there are probably more people on here who like paleontology or that are paleontologists or who are involved with paleontology. And since that was something that I wanted to get into, I actually transformed my old photography account. And it's really funny if you scroll all the way to the bottom of my posts, you can actually see some of my old photography when it was a photography account. So I went over to my photography account. I changed the name. It wasn't the same name I had now. It was just K Parsons Paleo, which I later changed to Katie Digs Dinos. And I decided from there that, hey, if there's one person on here posting paleo, there might as well be two. So I just decided to go for it. And from there, it kind of opened a door, and I started meeting a whole bunch of other people in the field, and it really became quite a useful networking tool. So I got to meet a bunch of other people in the field, really start to learn what it meant to be a paleontologist. And it was quite monumental for me to receive feedback from people who are currently in the field and get advice onto how I could do the same. And that's part of what I like to do with my account as well. It's half of it is a documentation on some of the stuff that I get up to around the museum and with fossil hunting and my own business. And then the other half of it is my academic journey and talking about becoming a paleontologist because I'm sure many people know if you Google how to become a paleontologist, it's not like there's a great array of resources for people to utilize. And there are many paths into this, but I found there wasn't a whole lot of information whenever I was 17 and looking for it. So that's kind of been how I started in the goal with my account.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, what piece of advice you'd have for somebody young person who wants to be a paleontologist. But I think I mean, right there's a pretty good sense. It's follow people like yourself, see their
Yeah.
journey. And one thing you'll probably come to realize is, as I have, and getting the chance to speak with a lot of paleontologists as we've put together Dinosaur Trips is myriad ways. Every paleontologist kind of has a different journey to how they came to it and how which thing they decided they wanted to specialize in and what struck their interest. Most of the time, many times it seems they're very surprised by what kind of caught their fancy once they started studying and then the road they went down. So
Yeah, it's a very dynamic science, and I've even gotten to the point I didn't start studying invertebrate fossils until the beginning of last August because I was required to take an invertebrate paleontology course for my undergraduate, and I have just absolutely fallen in love with invertebrate paleontology. So yet another branch of paleontology I'm going to have to work to narrow down. Still don't, like I said, I would like to work with osteology and dinosaur growth stages, but I'm in love with all of it.
amazing. So my final question for you, and I ask it kind of everybody that I talk to, because we are Dinosaur Trips, would love to know, anywhere in the world that you could travel to with the goal of doing it through the lens of paleontology, be that to go dig somewhere or a museum you'd love to go to, or just somewhere that sparks your interest. Where would you choose?
Oh goodness. That is a tough question. So so most of my interest lies in North American paleontology. I actually haven't been to the Museum of the Rockies yet, which is where so we have a Tyrannosaurus Rex cast on display at the museum, MOR 980, also called Pex Rex or Montana's Rex, which is on display at the Museum of the Rockies. Now I am gonna get to go there this summer, so I'm pretty excited for that. But besides out in Montana, which is my dream dig location. I'm very fortunate that I've been able to do that for the past few years now. I also have a really big interest in Abelisaurs, such as Majungasaurus, or gosh, I completely butchered that, Majungasaurus or Carnotaurus. And so if I was able to dig anywhere in the world, it would probably be in South America, where you can find those Abelisaurids.
Yeah, no, we're definitely looking at South America as a very soon destination for us. Like I said, there seems to be some great dig opportunities, some amazing little museums, and of course, the experience itself of so much of South America is gonna be amazing.
Oh, I agree. And I think that as it stands, and it could just be because my one and only language is English, and so I don't get the perspective of people who speak a variety of languages or who live in various parts of the world. But from what I've seen in paleo media, a lot of the attention is on North American dinosaurs and North American paleontology. And I think that South American paleontology, African paleontology, Asian paleontology, it's all criminally underrated because the fossils that you can find there and the preservation in some of these areas is absolutely phenomenal.
No, exactly. It seems like it's just waiting for its kind of moment. So to be
Absolutely.
just explore South America for sure through paleontology. Awesome. So do you have digs coming up this summer?
Yeah, so I am actually going out with the museum again to the same ranch that I've been going to. This will be my fourth year now. We don't have any big or elaborate field seasons. Like I said, we are a small nonprofit museum, and so the cost of the dig actually 100% comes from all of the attendees. So we actually pay to go. But I've never minded. It's a wonderful experience to get out and to go gain this experience being in the field and digging up dinosaurs. So we only have 2 weeks out there every summer, so we have to make the most of it. But this will be for the foreseeable future. I hope to get back out here with the Earth Experience crew, but for the foreseeable future, this will be my last dig with the Earth Experience Museum in Montana. Just, it's good. It's so uncertain going forward with my master's and hopefully my PhD right after. So, but I'm hoping to get back out there again with the crew.
All right. Well, all the best of luck with your master's and your PhD. And
Thank
yeah,
you.
where can people find you if they want to follow you on social?
So you can find me at Katie Diggs Dinos. That'll be Katie period Diggs period Dinos on Instagram. The username should just be Katie Diggs Dinos, no spaces, no weird punctuation or anything on Twitter or TikTok. If you go to any one of my pages, I have a link tree in my bio that leads to my shop, Dynamite Replicas, where I do actually sell my cast replicas as well as some mineral specimens and fossil specimens as well. But I am most active on Instagram. Oh, and YouTube very soon.
Oh, all right. Perfect. It's great. As this will be our one of our earliest videos up for Dinosaur Trips as well. So getting into that. All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much again for having me. It's been a real pleasure.